Thank you, Deputy Speaker. This bill is the next step in rebuilding the Australian public service after, frankly, a decade of degradation, disrespect, disregard and decay. I thought of those 4 D words, but having listened to the previous contribution, I'd also have to add denial. And I've said before, Christopher Pyne sent that member here to make us miss Christopher Pyne, as he would certainly win the boring Olympics. But really, I mean, that level of denial about the decade that's gone, the privatisation by stealth, the attacks on the public service independence, the politicisation, the appointment of mates, the overuse of consultants and the logo fetish, without taking any responsibility. I mean, he waffled on for 10 minutes about the Whitlam government 50 years ago, nothing about robodebt. Still waiting for anyone over there to apologise for that disgraceful scandal in public administration perpetrated on their watch. They want to talk as if that's somehow the fault of the public service. But, Deputy Speaker, great societies have great public services, and great public services need great public servants. It's an honourable profession. If there's one word I'd characterise to how a government should see its responsibilities with respect to the Australian public service, I'd say stewardship. Stewardship. That means understanding that the public service is a form of societal capital. It's been built up over years, decades, or indeed a century. And government of the day must understand their responsibility to leave the public service in as good or better shape than they found it for the governments and the societies and the community that comes afterwards. The public service is Australia's institutional memory. And really, you can't contract out your brain, much as this mob have tried, with the overuse of the Big Four consulting firms, to do things which can and only should be done by skilled public servants. As the previous speaker said, I couldn't disagree with a lot of the substance. It's just the denial about the level of responsibility which the previous government bears for the state we find ourselves in. It's the public service that society rightly expects to remember the public policy lessons of decades past. Only the public service should and could be expected to remember the lessons of royal commissions from the 1920s and the 1930s, the history of relations with foreign governments and so much more. Only the public service, not private consultants, the public service is bound by those eternal values of impartiality, accountability and ethical advice and decision-making. I just want to read a quote, Deputy Speaker, from a book by Tony Judd, Ill Fares the Land. It's just a few sentences. Something is profoundly wrong with the way we live today. For 30 years we've made a virtue out of the pursuit of material self-interest. Indeed, this very pursuit now constitutes whatever remains of our collective purpose. We know what things cost, but we have no idea what they're worth. We no longer ask of a judicial ruling or a legislative act, is it good? Is it right? Is it just? Is it fair? Will it help bring about a better society or a better world? Those used to be the political questions, even if they invited no easy answers. We must learn once again to pose them. And frankly, if anyone thinks that governments are going to be challenged and provoked and advised in that way with a set of foundational public values by the Big Four consulting firms or so-called independent contractors, then they've got rocks in their head. It is the role of the public service to give governments advice, whether they like it or not, frank and fearless, as we hear the words. But the former government set a culture of fear and disrespect and disregard over the public service, so that, as we saw through the robodebt Royal Commission, they were frankly too scared and cowed to give the government advice which they needed to hear. Those values of public service and advising in the public interest contrast with the record of the Liberals, of privatisation, of contracting out, of wasting literally billions of dollars on overheads for labour hire workers, casual workers, the Big Four consulting firm, a global cancer on public services right around the world, and casualisation. It is the very opposite of stewardship, their record. Probably the single most, the tool which is most responsible for the situation we found ourselves in was Tony Abbott's policy of staff caps, continued by all of them for 10 years, the ASL caps, privatisation by stealth. Here's a fact. When Tony Abbott and the Liberals were elected, their one policy for the Australian public service, literally their only policy, was to cut the number of public servants by 15,000. Why? It bore no relationship to service models or delivery or outcomes or society's needs. It was because that was the number that we had when John Howard left office. That was it. That was the rationale. And so in all the time after John Howard left office in 2007 to when we came to government, the population of the country had grown. We had an ageing population, we had the new NDIS, we had deteriorating strategic circumstances requiring more investment in defence, and a myriad of needs. And yet, in real terms, the public service was cut by 25%. The hard reality is, see, they yell and they scream and they don't want to hear it, but when you cut the public service and yet Australia has grown, you say to secretaries and government departments, to get the work done, you have to contract this out. That is their only choice. Now, in a private business, to randomly control one of your cost inputs or one of your levers is irrational. It's completely irrational. But that's what they did to the public service. You know, if we were writing emojis into Hansard at this point, Deputy Speaker, we'd have facepalm, we'd have head explosion, and a few others that I probably won't mention. So what happened, though? With this privatisation by stealth, we've inherited government departments with thousands upon thousands of casual labour hire workers, permanently temporary, shadowy shadow workforce, sitting there at the desks doing the same work as the public servants sitting alongside them. But of course the private labour hire companies clip the ticket on the way through, literally thousands of them. In this budget, the government put forward an initiative to convert 3,000 of these people to permanent jobs, with a saving over the next 4 years of $800 million. Through the Audit Committee, which I've been a member of for 7 years, we proved year after year, inquiry after inquiry, they literally wasted billions of dollars on the national debt for the next generation to repay because of their ideology of privatisation and their hatred and disregard for the notion of public service and the public sector, based on a flawed view that somehow the private sector is always more efficient. Well, it's just not true. It's rubbish. As, interestingly, the previous speaker actually acknowledged without taking any responsibility for the situation we find ourselves in. Now, I'll say there is absolutely a role for good consultants. Commercial advice, a fresh set of eyes, sometimes surge capacity, international lessons and jurisdictional comparisons. There is expertise from time to time that you don't have in the public service, and that's perfectly fine. But let's not pretend the billions of dollars of work that flowed at great expense, at great profit to the Big Four consulting firms was body shopping, as it's called. Stuff which should and could have been done far cheaper within the public service. Grant assessments, business cases, business plans. I mean, why on earth was this stuff? Low-level, routine rubbish, frankly, to contract out, given to the Big Four consulting firms. It was a false economy from the so-called party of fiscal discipline over there with the $1 trillion of Liberal debt. Wasted money. Labor's policy, unashamedly, is to remove the staff caps and save money. Who knew? You employ more public servants in the right areas and you actually save money, a thing that they still fail to accept. They say all the kind of stuff, but they don't actually get the core point. They created the mess because of their ideology. Unashamedly reinvesting in the public service. Now, we heard the start of a scare campaign earlier this year from the Leader of the Opposition. Remember in question time? Labor's employing 10,000 more public servants. He started that line, and then the PwC scandal erupted. Haven't heard that since, because I think that's driven home the point to the public. Yes, we can save money and rebuild the capability of the public service now and for the next generation by actually bringing some of that work in-house. Wait and see whether that scare campaign returns. There's also, and the previous speaker touched on this, what I've termed a logo fetish. I hope if something good comes from this disgraceful scandal at PwC, it's that once and for all the media and the public and people in this place, and frankly ministers, get over the logo fetish. I've been a senior public servant myself. I've had the experience with Labor and Liberal governments that when you do a piece of work and you're expert in the area and you send it up, there's, oh, I'm not so sure about that. was worse with the Liberal governments, but not across the board. And so then you go and say to KPMG or PwC or EY, one of them say, look, can you do this bit of work? Here's what I want you to do. And they put your work with their logo, and somehow it's a form of magic. You know, there's a demand side to this equation, not just a supply issue. That's something we all need to take some responsibility for. It leads to my next point. There's no such thing as an independent consultant, Deputy Speaker. It is a fiction. It is a fantasy. The Auditor-General said that very clearly to the Parliament a number of times through the Public Accounts and Audit Committee, does not accept that there's an independent consultant. And there's not. Like I said, there's a legitimate use. But at the end of the day, you get the draft report. And I've had that experience myself when we had a minister of the other persuasion who said, no, all program evaluations have to be done by an external firm. So, all right. So you put it out, $75,000. It's a cheap bit of work, frankly. And I get it back on a Friday night, it's due back on a Sunday, and it's rubbish. And then I look, and it's like, because the firm has sold us back someone who, frankly, I got rid of about a year ago because they weren't any good, who did this work, and you sit there and you make track changes on a Sunday, and they accept them and give it back to you, and that's the independent report. That's too often what goes on. That's a frank exposition of the reality. There is no such thing as an independent consultant. You can partner with consultants, you can get external capability, you can get grunt, you can get intellectual experience, but they're not independent. We should stop pretending that they are when you're paying the bill. This bill responds to the independent review of the APS led by Mr David Thodey, the former CEO of Telstra. It was commissioned by the former Liberal government. It was nice to hear that they now say they support it, because they wouldn't implement it. Prime Minister Turnbull commissioned it, and then they got the report and Prime Minister Morrison went, well, we're not doing that. The public service is here to shut up and do what they're told. It was basically what he said to them. First address as Prime Minister, he went and he said, we'll do the policy, you'll do the implementing. Now, in a narrow sense, of course that's true. Of course governments decide. But it is the public service's responsibility to brief governments, whether they want to hear it or not. That's part of how our system of government works. And the public service does not just work for executive government. It's created in the Constitution, and it's also accountable to this parliament, separate and different to its accountability to ministers. So, like I said, frank and fearless advice. So critical. Look, the final thing I'd just say on that notion of stewardship, the APS value of stewardship, I think it's incredibly important that we add that value in as a new public service value. The APS values articulate the culture and the operating ethos of the APS. They reflect the expectations between public servants and the government, the parliament and the community. They should change very, very slowly. They really should stand the test of time, and they shouldn't be changed lightly. And so it is a significant thing that the government is legislating a new value. It was developed through extensive consultation, input from over 1,500 APS staff across the country, from graduates to senior executives, and it outlines the stewardship value as meaning the APS builds capability and institutional knowledge and supports the public interest now and into the future by understanding the long-term impacts of what it does. And all APS employees, from the last person in the door last week at the most junior level to the most senior secretary, the Secretary of Prime Minister and Cabinet, are bound by those values. Unlike consultants, it's the public service that the public ultimately can trust are bound by those values. And stewardship involves learning from the past and looking into the future. It's actually a conservative value. It's a conservative value because it involves both conservation of the capital you've inherited, the knowledge which should be valued, as well as cultivation, leaving things in a better place than you found them. Seeing your role as part of the whole, preserving public trust and promoting the public good. Also has deep roots in Australia. It's a First Nations Australians' value, if you like, as our country's original stewards, caring for the country over tens of thousands of years and untold generations. And so whilst it's a value that this legislation is imposing on all public servants to be accountable for, I'll close close to where I started, that it's also a value that governments, this government and governments that will come after us, and secretaries must also hold dear for their responsibilities to steward the public service for the next generation. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
I thank the member for